Welcome, and thank you for spending this quiet evening with us here at Science Explained Daily. Tonight we are going to drift through the life of Alexander the Great, a young king who reshaped the ancient world before he was 30 years old. So find a comfortable place, let your eyes close, and simply let the words carry you somewhere far away and long ago. Far to the east of wherever the last story left you, across wide plains and older mountains, lies the ancient land of Macedonia. It is a rugged country of cold rivers and pine forests, where the winters come down hard from the north and the summers burn long in gold. In the year 356 before the Common Era, in a palace at Pella, a child was born who would one day be known simply as the Great. His mother Olympias was a proud and fierce woman from Epirus, and she told her son from his earliest years that he was descended from Achilles himself. His father Philip II was already reshaping Macedonia into a true military power, and the young Alexander watched everything with very careful eyes. By the time Alexander was 13, his father brought to the court a philosopher from the island of Lesbos, a man named Aristotle. In a quiet grove called the Nymphaeon near the city of Mysa, the boy sat among the cool shade of olive trees and learned about medicine, philosophy, and the stars. Aristotle gave Alexander a copy of the Iliad, and the young prince kept it close for the rest of his life, tucking it each night beneath his pillow alongside a dagger. Even as a boy he was restless, and when his father was away at war, he received foreign ambassadors himself and asked them long, quiet questions about the roads to Persia. There is a story that Alexander tamed a horse no other man could ride, a great black stallion called Bucephalus, simply by turning its face toward the sun so it could no longer see its own shadow. His father Philip watched this and said quietly, "My son, you will need to find a kingdom large enough to hold you, for Macedonia alone is too small." In 336, Philip was assassinated at a grand celebration in the theater at Aigai, and at 20 years old, Alexander suddenly held the kingdom in his hands. Some of those who had hoped the young king might falter found instead that he moved with a speed and certainty that left no room for hesitation. He secured his borders first, moving through Thrace and Illyria with quiet efficiency before the dust of his father's death had fully settled. Then he turned south to Greece, where the city of Thebes had rebelled, and he made an example so complete and so sorrowful that the other Greek cities grew very still. In 334, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Europe and Asia, with around 40,000 soldiers and a treasury that would last only 30 days. He paused at the shore of Asia and threw his spear into the ground, claiming the whole continent as territory won by the spear. At a river called the Granicus, he fought his first major battle against the Persian satraps, and the water ran cold and bright beneath the horses' hooves. He visited Troy and laid a wreath on the tomb said to belong to Achilles, the hero his mother had told him was his own ancestor. Moving south through Asia Minor, one ancient city after another opened its gates to him, some in fear, some in genuine relief to be free of Persian taxation. In the city of Gordium in Phrygia, there was a famous knot tied to an old wagon, and legend said that whoever untied it would rule all of Asia. Alexander studied the knot for a quiet moment and then, depending on which ancient writer you believe, either sliced it through with his sword or simply pulled out the pin that held it. Either way, he walked away satisfied, and the army moved on toward the south and the long coast of what is now Turkey, and the wind off the sea was cool that evening. At Issus in 333, he met the Persian king Darius III in battle, a man commanding an army so vast that ancient sources struggled to count it. When the Persian line broke and Darius fled in his chariot, he left behind his mother, his wife, and his daughters, and Alexander treated them gently, as if they were his own family. He moved next into Egypt, where the priests of the oracle at Siwa greeted him as a son of the god Ammon, and the slow Nile continued its patient flow as it always had. He founded a city on the Egyptian coast and named it Alexandria, and he planned its wide streets himself in the sand before the construction had even begun. From Egypt he turned east again toward Mesopotamia, toward the old heart of the Persian Empire, through land so flat that the horizon seemed to lean away forever. At Gaugamela in 331, beneath a wide-open sky, he defeated Darius once more and became, in the reckoning of most of the ancient world, the King of Kings. He was 25 years old, and he stood at the center of an empire stretching from Greece to the edge of what the Greeks called the ends of the earth. And still, somewhere beyond the eastern mountains, the road continued, and Alexander rested only long enough to wonder what was waiting just a little further on. From the quiet earth, let your thoughts drift now slowly outward, toward the sea, where the water holds its own kind of stillness. Somewhere beneath the Aegean, in waters not so deep, a wooden ship came to rest more than 2,000 years ago. It had been sailing from the east, likely carrying marble and bronze and things of great value, when it quietly sank near a small island called Antikythera. There it rested, undisturbed, on the seafloor, through the slow turning of empires and centuries. In the year 1900, sponge divers from the island of Simi found the wreck by chance, surfacing with an arm of ancient bronze. Salvage crews arrived, pulling up statues and amphorae and coins from the Roman era, piece by careful piece. Among the corroded fragments, almost overlooked in the mud, was a lump of bronze the size of a large book, cracked and broken into pieces. At first it was set aside with the other miscellaneous bronze, thought to be nothing more than a decorative fitting or a common tool. But a few months later, as the fragments dried and cracked open, something extraordinary became visible inside. There were gears, precisely cut, their teeth still meshing perfectly after 2 millennia beneath the sea. Tiny, intricate, made with a patience and precision that seemed to belong to a much later age of making things. The device had dials on its faces, and inscriptions in Greek so small you would need to lean close, very close, to read them at all. For 50 years, nobody understood what it was, this puzzling bronze thing pulled from the sea. A historian named Derek de Sala Price spent years with the fragments and slowly, gently, began to understand. It was, he came to believe, an astronomical calculator, a device for tracking the movements of the sun and moon and planets. You could turn a small handle on its side, and the dials would slowly move, tracing the heavens forward or backward in time. It could predict eclipses, following a cycle the Babylonians had discovered long before, called the Saros cycle, of nearly 18 years. It tracked the Metonic cycle too, 19 years of calendars aligning, a rhythm the ancient world used to set its festivals and seasons. There was a dial on the back, a spiral of concentric circles, showing the slow months of the Metonic cycle turning year by year. And another spiral below, tracking the Saros cycle, with small notches marking the predicted times of eclipses to come. Modern imaging, done with patient X-rays and scanning, revealed that inside the mechanism there were at least 30 distinct gears. Some researchers believe there may have been more, lost or crumbled away in the long silence of the seafloor. One of the gears carried a pin and slot that gave a slightly uneven motion, mimicking the real orbit of the moon. The moon does not move smoothly across the sky, and whoever built this knew that, and made the gears remember it. The front of the device showed the Egyptian calendar, the Greek zodiac, and the position of the sun moving through the year. There may have been a planetarium function as well, small pointers or spheres tracking Venus and Jupiter and Saturn across their slow paths. We do not know who made it, though the inscriptions carry echoes of language from Corinth, or perhaps from one of its colonies to the west. No other device of its kind has ever been found, anywhere, from that era or for more than 1,000 years afterward. It stands entirely alone in the long history of human making, a single quiet object with no predecessors and no known descendants. The fragments sit today in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, carefully housed, carefully lit. People come and stand before the case, looking at the corroded bronze, trying quietly to understand what they are seeing. What kind of mind, working in the 2nd or 1st century before our era, built something so far ahead of everything around it. We can reconstruct the gears and trace the mathematics, but the maker remains unknown, unnamed, a quiet presence dissolved into time. And so the mechanism rests, still and patient, its gears no longer turning, the planets it once tracked still moving overhead. Softly, imagine drifting upward above the turning world, clouds parting slowly beneath you, until the land below settles into the quiet green plains of southern England. Here, on Salisbury Plain, a circle of enormous grey stone stands in open grassland, patient and still, exactly as it has stood for thousands of years. The stones are immense, some weighing as much as 25 tons, yet they were raised with extraordinary care into precise alignment. What is less spoken about is not the stones themselves, but the people who carried them here, shaped them, and then quietly vanished from the record. We do not know their language, their name for themselves, or how many generations labored across centuries to complete this single, enduring place. Slowly, archaeologists have learned to read the soil itself, finding ash and bone and antler tools pressed gently into the earth beneath the plain. The builders were not one people but many, arriving in waves across centuries, each generation adding something quietly to what was already there. The earliest work at this site began perhaps 5,000 years ago, with nothing more than a circular ditch cut carefully into the chalky ground. In time, small bluestones were brought here from Wales, a journey of hundreds of miles across rivers and along rough ancient coastlines. The bluestones are smaller than what stands there now, pale blue-gray in certain light, and they carry within them a faint crystalline sparkle. No one has fully explained why they chose stone from so far away, when perfectly suitable rock lay much closer to this plain. Perhaps those distant hills held some meaning that has never been recorded, a sacredness that existed long before the stones were moved. Far away across the plain, the larger sarsen stones were quarried at Marlborough Downs, some 25 miles to the north. These great grey blocks were shaped with only stone and antler tools, ground into their final form with infinite patience across generations. The builders carved mortise and tenon joints into the tops of the uprights, locking the lintels in place with a precision that still holds today. Gently, you begin to sense the long patience of these people, how they measured time not in years but in lifetimes passed down like stones. The monument was built in careful stages across perhaps 1,500 years, each phase begun by people who may never have seen the last. Around the monument, the land itself was shaped into avenues and earthworks, a whole ceremonial landscape that stretched for miles in every direction. People came here from as far as the Mediterranean, their remains found in ancient graves nearby, resting quietly in the chalk beneath the plain. Among the bones, small amber beads and copper ornaments tell of journeys so long that the travelers could hardly have imagined their destination. Slowly, around the monument, the ash of enormous feasts was pressed into the soil, traces of cattle and pig and hearth fire long since cold. A nearby timber circle once stood here too, its posts long rotted away, leaving only the dark rings of their memory pressed into the earth. In time, the timber gave way to stone, or perhaps the wood and stone existed together, serving purposes that have left no written word behind. The stones are aligned to the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset, though whether this was astronomy or ceremony or simply beauty is not clear. Far away, the sun rises in a specific place, and every year for 5,000 years, it has risen through that same deliberate gap between the stones. There is something quietly remarkable in that whatever else was lost, this alignment has survived intact across all the turning centuries. And then, in time, the people who built this place simply recede from the record, their descendants blending with others until the original builders are gone. The monument remained, patient and unchanged, while peoples who had no memory of its making looked upon it with the same quiet wonder we feel now. Roman travelers paused here and left no record of what they thought it meant, only a few coins pressed into the soil at its edge. Medieval monks wrote it into their chronicles as a wonder, and the name Stonehenge first appears in writing nearly 1,000 years after Rome had gone. The question of who built it was already ancient by then, a mystery not of our modern making but older than nearly every institution we know. Slowly, the plain around it breathes with wind passing through long grass, and the stones stand as they have always stood, saying nothing. Whatever answers were once known have dissolved like morning mist over the plain, leaving only the stones, and the quiet, and the unanswered air. And so the great circle rests on its chalky hill, patient as ever, holding whatever it holds in silence, beneath the slow turning of the sky. The night has grown a little quieter now, and somewhere far from the sea, the land itself holds old and patient secrets beneath its soil. In the dry earth of central China, not far from the old city of Xi'an, the ground rests over something almost impossible to imagine. Beneath the surface, row upon row of life-sized clay soldiers stand in long vaulted corridors of packed earth, as they have stood for more than 2,000 years. Each figure was shaped by hand, fired in kilns, and placed facing east, patient, still, and waiting in the dark below the fields. The army was made for Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first man to unite the warring kingdoms of ancient China into a single empire. He ruled with absolute authority, and when he thought about death, he thought about it the way he thought about everything, with total seriousness. So beside the great mound that would become his tomb, the clay army was quietly assembled, thousands of figures, each one slightly different from the next. If you walk slowly through the museum that now shelters the site, you notice that no two faces are the same. Some have high cheekbones, some have softer brows, some seem almost young, and the quiet variety of them settles over you like something dreamlike. Historians believe the sculptors may have modeled the faces on real soldiers, real men who once stood in sunlight and breathed the same dusty air. There are cavalry figures beside horses, archers kneeling in permanent readiness, officers standing with a stillness that feels almost like sleep. The horses are extraordinary, their nostrils gently flared, their ears pricked forward, frozen in a moment that feels more alive than stone should ever feel. When the soldiers were first buried, they were painted, rich reds and greens and blacks, vivid as a festival, but the pigment faded when the air touched it again. So they stand today in their warm earthen tones, the color of the soil that held them, and there is something peaceful about that. The burial complex was enormous, stretching across many square kilometers, with separate pits for different divisions of the army. One pit holds the infantry in their long ranks, another holds the command figures, and a third holds the chariots, an entire world laid out below the ground. And at the center of it all, still unopened, still sealed, lies the emperor's actual tomb, a great earthen mound that has never been excavated. Ancient texts describe rivers of liquid mercury flowing through miniature maps of the empire inside that sealed chamber. Modern instruments have indeed detected unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil around the mound, and the description, for now, remains unverified. There is something quietly remarkable about a thing so large and so significant sitting undisturbed beneath a small forested hill in a farming landscape. The first warriors were found in 1974 by farmers digging a well, a moment so ordinary on the surface, and so astonishing just below it. They struck terracotta, then bronze, then the fragments of a face, and the world that had been sealed away for centuries quietly began to surface. In the years of careful excavation that followed, the scale of what lay beneath slowly became clear, not hundreds of figures, but thousands. The weapons they carry are real, bronze swords and crossbow mechanisms that still function after 2 millennia, preserved by the sealed earth. Some of the sword blades remain sharp enough to cut, which is a small detail that somehow makes the whole army feel less like a relic and more like something paused. In the quieter parts of the museum, where restoration work is laid out on long tables, a technician slowly reassembles fragments by their color and their shape. It is patient work, and it mirrors the patience of the emperor himself, a man who believed that what he built in this life would endure into the next. Beyond the pits, across the wide site, the land is still and golden in the late afternoon, and the great mound rises at the center like a slow exhalation. Nobody has gone inside, and for now there is a kind of grace in that, in the simple fact of something enormous remaining unknown. The clay soldiers stand in their corridors, facing east as they always have, in the soft light that filters down through the museum roof. There is no urgency to them, only stillness, and the particular calm of things that have endured far longer than anyone expected them to. Outside, the fields are quiet, the mound rests undisturbed, and somewhere beneath the soil, whatever the emperor built is still waiting in the dark. Perhaps what he truly wanted was simply to carry something with him, the memory of an empire, the weight of 10,000 loyal faces. And so the army rests, and the mound rests, and the night settles gently over the plain of Xi'an, as it has for more than 2,000 years. Somewhere far away, a soft amber light seems to glow from within old palace walls, warm and unhurried as candlelight caught in honey. There is a room in history that once existed and then, very quietly, ceased to exist, leaving only the memory of its glow. The Amber Room was assembled in the early 18th century, its walls covered entirely in panels of carved Baltic amber, a material so rare it was once called the gold of the north. Imagine standing inside a room where every surface, floor to ceiling, catches the light and holds it, glowing from within like something alive. The original room was a gift between kings, assembled in Prussia and then transported piece by piece to St. Petersburg, where it found its home in the Catherine Palace. For more than 2 centuries it rested there, reflecting candlelight and the slow turning of seasons outside its tall windows. Visitors who saw it described a kind of warmth that was not quite light and not quite color, something the amber itself seemed to breathe outward. Then came the autumn of 1941, and with it a different kind of silence, the kind that follows when something irreplaceable is suddenly gone. German forces arrived at the Catherine Palace and, within a matter of days, the amber panels were dismantled, crated, and carried away to the west. They were taken to Königsberg, a city on the Baltic coast, ancient and storied, where they were installed in the local castle and displayed for a time. People walked through those amber walls in that eastern castle, perhaps not fully understanding what they were standing inside. And then, as the war moved closer and the nights grew longer, the panels were packed away once more, and that is where the trail grows quiet. No one has ever agreed on exactly what happened next, whether the crates were moved by train, by truck, or by ship across that cold northern sea. Some accounts suggest the amber panels were hidden underground somewhere in the forests and bunkers of former East Prussia. Others believe a ship called the Wilhelm Gustloff carried part of the treasure, a ship that sank in those same Baltic waters not long after. The wreck of that ship rests quietly now on the Baltic floor, holding whatever secrets it carries beneath the cold still water. Divers have explored it, gently and carefully, but the amber panels, if they were ever there, have not been found. Across the following decades, many people searched, in forests, in old mines, in sealed bunkers buried beneath the earth of Kaliningrad. There are records of tunnels that were sealed in the final days of the war, openings buried under rubble that no one has managed to fully clear. Sometimes a researcher finds an old document, a handwritten order, a faded shipping manifest, that seems to point somewhere new. The document is studied carefully, translated slowly, and then the trail grows quiet again, as trails in this story always seem to do. In Pushkin, near St. Petersburg, a reconstruction of the Amber Room was completed in 2003, built over 24 years by Russian craftsmen. Standing inside it now, you can feel something of what the original must have held, that particular warmth that amber alone knows how to give. Yet this is a copy, beautiful, patient, and faithful, and somewhere the original still waits, in whatever form it has taken after all these years. Amber itself is very old, some pieces formed 60 million years ago, trapping insects and seeds inside the slow golden sap of ancient trees. There is something fitting about that, a material born from patience and time, now lost to time, waiting somewhere as it has always waited. The Baltic coast where much of this amber originated is still a quiet place, long pale beaches where the sea washes amber ashore after storms. People still walk those beaches slowly, looking down at the sand, finding small golden pieces the sea has carried in from somewhere deeper. It is an old and gentle ritual, bending down, lifting something golden from the earth, wondering where it has been. The panels of the original room may rest in darkness somewhere, or perhaps they have been scattered, each amber piece slowly returning to its own story. No one knows, and perhaps that is the truest thing that can be said, that some beautiful things leave without explanation and simply remain away. The reconstruction glows warmly in its room at the Catherine Palace, and visitors pass through slowly, and the amber holds its light as amber always has. And somewhere, perhaps beneath old pines or beneath cold water, the original panels rest, unchanged by time, still holding the light they were given long ago. The question of where they are drifts on, unhurried, the way amber drifts in from the sea, arriving in its own time, or not arriving at all. There is a silence over the southern desert of Peru that is unlike almost any other silence in the world. No wind moves through the dry grasses, and no birds call, and the pale earth simply rests beneath the open sky. This place is called the Pampa Colorada, the colored plain, a high and treeless shelf of land pressed between the mountains and the sea. The soil here is the color of old rust, and beneath a thin layer of darker stones lies pale yellowish earth that has barely changed in 2,000 years. And across this quiet plain, stretching in every direction, are lines. They run perfectly straight for kilometers, crossing hills and gullies as though the land itself did not exist. Some are narrow, no wider than a path a person might walk, while others open into great pale trapezoids the size of airfields. The people who made them are known as the Nazca, and they lived here in this dry valley roughly 2,000 years ago. They were farmers and weavers and potters, and they understood this land in ways that are now only partially remembered. Among the lines there are also figures, great animals drawn onto the earth with the same patient removal of dark stones to reveal the pale layer beneath. There is a hummingbird with wings spread wide, its long beak reaching outward across the empty plain. There is a spider, delicate and precise, its 8 legs arranged with a kind of careful symmetry that feels almost tender. There is a monkey with a long curling tail, a condor with enormous wings, a whale moving through the dry earth as if through deep water. From the ground, none of these figures can be seen whole, they are simply too large, too spread across the land. A person walking beside one of the lines would only see a pale path leading quietly away into the distance. It was not until the age of flight that anyone saw the figures whole, and even then the first pilots who noticed them were simply confused. What they saw from above did not fit any category of thing that seemed to belong to the ancient world. The lines have survived here largely because this desert is one of the driest places on Earth, with almost no rain to wash them away. The air above the pampa is still, and the ground below is hard, and together they have preserved these marks across 20 centuries. Many people have tried to explain why the Nazca people made these things, and the explanations have been many and thoughtful and none of them quite complete. Some have said the lines point toward mountain peaks where water once gathered, and that they were prayers for rain drawn on the earth. Others have suggested they were walked as ritual paths, ceremonial routes that carried people slowly through the dry land in procession. There is something in that idea that feels true to the quietness of this place, to the patience required to make such things. The Nazca had no machines, no horses, no wheels, and yet the lines are more precise than many things built in the modern world. Researchers have found wooden stakes in the ground, and lengths of cord, the simple tools of people who understood geometry deeply and naturally. And so the great figures were drawn slowly, over time, by hands that would never see the whole of what they were making. There is something restful in thinking about that, people working patiently at a task whose full beauty existed only in some other kind of seeing. The desert holds them still, unchanged, the animals and the long straight roads lying quiet beneath the same blue sky. At dusk the shadows lengthen along the lines, and the figures seem to breathe a little in the changing light. The hummingbird, the spider, the monkey with its spiral tail, they have been here so long that the desert seems to belong to them now. And when the light fades and the plain grows cool and the first stars appear above the Andes, the silence returns completely. The questions that people have asked about this place remain open, gently, the way questions do when they are very old. No one knows, and perhaps that is all right. Some things were made for a kind of attention we have simply not yet learned to give. And the plain rests on, as it always has, holding its figures lightly beneath the open and unchanging sky. Centuries drift away now, and we find ourselves settling quietly in the cool stone city of Turin, in northern Italy. Inside a great cathedral there, held within a climate-controlled chamber, rests a length of ancient linen cloth. The cloth is long and narrow, woven in a herringbone pattern that speaks of skilled and patient hands from long ago. Upon its surface, faint and amber-toned, there is an image of a man lying still, arms folded, eyes closed. This is the Shroud of Turin, and for centuries people have come from distant places simply to stand near it in silence. The image on the cloth shows wounds at the wrists and feet, marks across the shoulders, and a single puncture at the side. Many who have studied it say the wounds correspond with extraordinary precision to what the Gospels describe of the crucifixion. The cloth itself measures roughly 14 feet in length, wide enough to wrap a full-grown man from head to foot and back again. Scholars have debated for generations how the image came to be there at all, and no single answer has ever fully satisfied everyone. In the soft light of a laboratory, researchers have found that the image sits only on the very outermost fibers of the cloth. It does not soak through the weave the way a paint or dye would, but rests upon it as lightly as morning frost on glass. No brush stroke has ever been found, and no pigment matching any known medieval paint has been identified with certainty. Some have proposed that the image was formed by a burst of radiant energy, though no one has been able to reproduce it. In 1898, a photographer named Secondo Pia made the first photograph of the cloth, and in the negative he saw something unexpected. The negative revealed a face of striking clarity, as though the cloth itself were already a photographic negative waiting to be seen. That discovery changed how the world thought about the cloth, and the questions it raised have never quite gone quiet since. The cloth carries faint traces of pollen from plants that grow in the region of Jerusalem and the eastern Mediterranean. Botanists who have studied these traces say some of the species bloom only in the spring, around the time of Passover. In 1988, small samples of the cloth were sent to 3 independent laboratories for radiocarbon dating. The results placed the cloth's origin somewhere in the medieval period, between the 13th and 14th centuries. And yet those who believe deeply in its authenticity have raised quiet questions about the samples taken, and where on the cloth they came from. Some researchers have suggested the corner sampled may have been rewoven in the Middle Ages, a repair that altered its carbon signature. The debate has never been fully resolved, and the cloth rests quietly in Turin still, neither proven nor dismissed. What is certain is that the cloth has traveled across centuries of history, surviving fires and floods and the slow passing of time. In 1532, a fire nearly destroyed it, and nuns spent long quiet hours sewing the burn marks together with careful hands. Those repair patches are still visible, pale triangles sewn along one edge, quiet evidence of all the centuries the cloth has witnessed. Slowly, as the nights of history passed, the cloth was folded and stored, carried in wooden chests through wars and migrations. It came to Turin in the 16th century and has remained there, held within the chapel behind the cathedral's altar. The chapel itself was designed by the architect Guarini, its dome a spiral of interlocking arches that seem to climb without end. Standing beneath that dome, the light falls in long soft columns, and the air carries the faint coolness of very old stone. The cloth is not often displayed, and when it is, the lines of visitors stretch quietly through the piazza outside for days. People travel great distances to stand before it, some in prayer, some in curiosity, and many simply in a kind of wordless stillness. And so it remains, resting in its silver case, a length of ancient linen that holds more questions than the centuries have answered. Far away, the city of Turin hums softly through the night, and somewhere within the cathedral the cloth rests, as it always has, in the quiet. Somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, on a small volcanic island, there are wooden tablets that no one alive can read. The island is called Rapa Nui, and it sits alone, farther from any continent than almost any other inhabited place on Earth. Most people know it for the great stone faces that stand along its shores, looking quietly outward toward the sea. But long before those statues became famous, something else was found on the island, something much smaller, and in many ways far stranger. They are flat pieces of wood, some no larger than a hand, etched from edge to edge with tiny carved figures. The figures are remarkable: birds with human bodies, fish, crescents, geometric forms, all arranged in careful flowing rows. This writing system is called Rongorongo, and it remains one of the few undeciphered scripts ever discovered anywhere in the world. When European missionaries arrived on the island in the 1860s, they found that certain people still knew how to read these tablets aloud. The knowledge passed through a small number of people who had learned it carefully, generation by generation, across many centuries. Then, very quickly and very quietly, that knowledge disappeared, and no one is entirely certain why. Some researchers believe a catastrophic series of events in the mid-1800s disrupted the island's population so severely that the readers were simply gone. Slavers took many of the island's people to work in South American mines in 1862, and most never returned. Disease followed, and the population fell from thousands to fewer than 150 people within a single decade. By the time anyone thought to ask about the tablets seriously, the last people who might have explained them were already gone. What remained were the tablets themselves, about 24, scattered now across museums in Europe, the Americas, and Honolulu. Each one is held very carefully now, because the wood is old and fragile and the carvings are so fine they can be damaged by touch alone. Scholars have studied them for over a century and a half, comparing every symbol, counting every form, mapping every possible pattern. The glyphs number in the hundreds of distinct forms, but the total inscribed across all tablets runs into the thousands. One thing scholars noticed early on is that the script runs in an unusual direction, alternating lines, each one flipped upside down from the last. To read it, you would turn the tablet over at the end of each line, then begin the next line from the bottom edge. This style of writing is found in a few other ancient traditions, but here it seems to have emerged entirely on its own, far from everywhere. Some researchers believe Rongorongo is a true writing system, one that records language the way letters do. Others believe it may be something more like a memory aid, symbols that help the reader recall long passages learned by heart. A small number of partial decipherments have been proposed over the years, most of them involving lunar or agricultural calendars. One researcher found what appeared to be a lunar calendar embedded in one of the tablets, repeating in a cycle of 29 or 30 symbols. But even if that interpretation holds, it explains only a portion of what is carved, the rest remains as quiet and still as it has always been. There is one tablet considered especially significant, found wrapped carefully in reeds and kept hidden for many years by a local family. It was eventually brought to a museum, and scholars found it to be among the longest and most complete of all the known tablets. When linguists attempted to match the symbols to the sounds of the old Rapa Nui language, the patterns did not quite resolve into words. The island itself still holds a kind of quiet gravity, those enormous stone figures watching the horizon as they have for 5 or 6 centuries. The people who carved both the statues and the tablets were skilled and deliberate, working in a tradition that clearly meant a great deal to them. What the tablets were for, ceremony, history, prayer, law, no one can say with certainty, and perhaps no one ever will. The wooden tablets rest in their cases now, each one holding its silence across the quiet years, unread and unhurried. And somewhere out past the island's stone faces, the ocean goes on as it always has, wide and gentle and without end. Somewhere beyond the last story, a soft mist has settled over old stone walls, and the air carries the faint dampness of an autumn that never quite leaves. In a library in Central Europe, there rests a small book, handwritten centuries ago, whose every word has resisted understanding for as long as anyone can remember. The pages are made of vellum, soft and pale, and they have survived roughly 600 years of handling with a quiet, unhurried patience. The writing flows from left to right in an even, practiced hand, as though whoever held the quill knew exactly what they were saying. And yet no one, across many generations and many languages, has ever been able to read a single sentence of it. The book is called the Voynich Manuscript, named for the rare book dealer who brought it to wider notice in the early years of the 20th century. Wilfrid Voynich discovered it in a trunk at a Jesuit college in Italy in 1912, tucked among other forgotten volumes. He was immediately drawn to it, sensing that the strange, looping script and vivid illustrations were something unlike anything he had seen before. Carbon dating would later suggest the vellum was prepared sometime in the early to mid-1400s, placing its origin in the late medieval world. But the language written on those pages belongs to no known time, no known place, and no recognized tradition of human writing. Scholars have examined it for over a century and the book holds its silence with what feels almost like gentleness. The illustrations inside are what first catch the eye, drawn in a style that feels both deliberate and somehow dreamlike. There are plants on many pages, drawn with great care, yet none of them match any species that botanists have been able to identify. The roots twist in ways that no root grows, and the flowers bloom in shapes that belong to no family of plants known on Earth. Some pages show what appear to be stars and constellations, arranged in careful circular diagrams filled with the same unreadable text. Other sections show figures, pale and rounded, drifting through networks of tubes and pools in a way that suggests bathing or perhaps some kind of flow. The pools are painted in soft blues and greens, and the whole scene has an unhurried, almost tender quality about it. Cryptographers from 2 world wars turned their attention to the manuscript and came away quietly puzzled, with no progress to report. The text has the statistical fingerprints of a real language, with rhythms and repetitions that feel organic and deliberate. Certain words appear again and again, as though they carry weight, as though the author returned to them the way one returns to a familiar thought. And yet no cipher system attempted so far has unlocked even a phrase, a name, or a number from those careful lines. The manuscript came with a letter, found tucked inside its cover, written in 1666 and addressed to a famous scholar of the day. That letter claimed the book had once belonged to Emperor Rudolf II of Bohemia, who reportedly paid a small fortune for it. Rudolf had a well-known love of the mysterious and the arcane, collecting curiosities from across Europe in his famous Wunderkammer. Before Rudolf, the trail grows faint and the book seems to drift backwards through time without leaving clear footprints. Some have suggested it could be the work of the medieval philosopher Roger Bacon, though no firm evidence has ever tied his hand to those pages. Others have proposed it was an elaborate hoax, a beautiful forgery crafted to deceive a wealthy buyer centuries ago. But the vellum itself dates to the 1400s, and producing such a sustained and internally consistent invented script would have been an extraordinary effort. Slowly, the listener might let the unanswered question rest beside them like an old book left open on a quiet night table. The manuscript now lives at the Beinecke Rare Book Library at Yale University, held in a controlled environment away from light and time. It rests there quietly, page after page of something that was once fully understood by someone, somewhere, long ago. In time the questions settle, and the not knowing becomes something soft and wide, like a room with no particular walls. The manuscript does not ask to be solved, perhaps, so much as simply witnessed, the way one witnesses clouds drifting slowly across a wide and patient sky. And somewhere in a library in New Haven, those vellum pages lie still in the quiet, holding whatever they hold, unhurried and untroubled by our wondering. Somewhere far from the cold mists of the last story, the air grows warm and dry, carrying the faint scent of ancient dust and sun-baked clay. In the land between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, there is a city called Baghdad, very old and very still. Not far from that city, in a suburb called Kujut Rabu, workers in 1936 were carefully moving earth that had not been touched for 2,000 years. A German archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was sorting through the objects recovered from that quiet ground when he came across something very small and very puzzling. It was a small clay jar, about the height of a hand, reddish-brown, sealed at the top with a plug of asphalt. Inside the jar was a copper cylinder, carefully rolled, it seems sealed with the same dark pitch. And inside that copper cylinder, just resting there in the dark earth for 20 centuries, was an iron rod. Koenig held the pieces quietly, turning them over, and slowly a thought arrived that he could not quite dismiss. The arrangement of the objects, clay vessel, copper sleeve, iron core, reminded him of something invented in Europe more than 1,000 years later. It reminded him, very gently and without certainty, of a battery. When researchers later filled a replica jar with an acidic liquid, grape juice, or vinegar, ordinary things, it produced a small and quiet electrical current. Not a powerful current, nothing dramatic, only about 1 volt, soft and slow, like a whisper of energy from very long ago. The jar itself dates, very quietly, to somewhere between 250 BCE and 250 CE, a span of 5 calm centuries. Those were the years of the Parthian Empire, a civilization that spread peacefully across the land between the rivers and left many beautiful things behind. No one knows if the Parthians made this jar, or if it came earlier, or later, carried along by some quieter current of human hands. What is known is simply that the jar was there, in the ground, waiting in the warm dark under the Iraqi sun for 2,000 years. After the discovery, the jar was brought to the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, where it rested in a glass case under soft light. For decades it sat there, small and unassuming, the kind of object that visitors would walk past without knowing what question it held. The question is a gentle one, not dramatic, just quietly persistent. What was this jar meant to do? Some have suggested it may have stored sacred scrolls, or that the copper was used in some medicinal or ritual way now forgotten. Others have suggested that ancient craftsmen may have used weak electrical current to electroplate thin layers of gold onto silver objects. Gold-covered objects from that same region and period do exist, their surfaces unusually thin and even in ways that still puzzle conservators. But no writing from that time mentions electricity, or current, or any device like this one, and the silence of the record is very deep. The jar may have been one of many, or it may have been the only one ever made, the earth has not yet said. There is something very restful about an object whose purpose remains genuinely open, no verdict pressed upon it, no tidy answer assigned. The land around Baghdad is mostly flat and pale now, stretching under the wide sky with a kind of unhurried patience. The Tigris is still there, moving slowly south, carrying its soft brown water past ruins and palm groves and quiet banks. Somewhere not far from that river, the little jar was sleeping in the earth while empires rose and settled around it like slow tides. It is still possible to hold a replica of the Baghdad Battery and feel the very slight warmth of something happening inside, a tiny, patient current. Whether that current meant anything to the hands that first assembled the jar is a question that drifts gently, without urgency, unanswered. The desert keeps its own time, slow and warm and completely indifferent to our wanting to know. And so the Baghdad Battery remains as it has always been, small, reddish-brown, and quietly extraordinary in its ordinary shape. Perhaps tonight, somewhere between sleep and waking, you might imagine the jar sitting in that warm earth, unhurried, keeping whatever secret it keeps. The warm air settles, the rivers move slowly in the distance, and the old ground holds its quiet, patient, and completely unresolved mystery. Slowly, let the centuries carry you back nearly 4,000 years, to the warm southern coast of Crete. There, on a gentle hill above the sea, the ruins of a Minoan palace still rest in the quiet afternoon light. This place is called Phaistos, and it was discovered again by archaeologists in the early 1900s, sleeping under centuries of soil. In the summer of 1908, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernier was working quietly through the layers of a small basement room. His brush moved slowly across compacted earth, and then it touched something round, something flat, something unlike anything the ancient world had offered before. What he lifted from the ground that day was a disc of fired clay, roughly the size of a human palm, covered on both sides with small pressed symbols. The disc is reddish-brown, smooth at the edges, and its surface is arranged in a spiral of 45 distinct sections, each one pressed with tiny pictographic signs. There are 241 individual signs across both faces, formed from 45 different repeating shapes, a walking figure, a feathered headdress, a ship, a beehive. Each symbol was not scratched by hand but stamped into the soft clay with a small carved tool, making the Phaistos disc one of the earliest known uses of movable type in human history. The disc was baked hard, preserved by fire rather than by care, and it survived 4 millennia buried beneath the palace that once stood above it. It now rests in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, held in a glass case, still carrying its message that nobody has ever fully read. Scholars have studied it for more than 100 years, and yet the language it speaks has never been matched to any other known script in the world. Linear A, the Minoan writing system from the same island and the same era, is itself still undeciphered, and the Phaistos disc does not appear to match even that. It stands entirely alone, a single object carrying a single message from a world that vanished before it could explain itself. The 45 symbols include a man running, a woman kneeling, a cat's head, a plain tree leaf, a carpenter's tool, and a shape that no one has yet named with confidence. Some of the symbols appear across both sides of the disc, others only once, and their arrangement follows the spiral inward from the outer edge toward the center. Whether it is a prayer, a hymn, a legal document, an administrative record, or something with no modern equivalent, no one has determined. The palace of Phaistos itself was grand once, its stone corridors wide, its storerooms full of oil jars, its courtyard open to the sky above the Mazara plain. The plain below it is one of the most fertile in all of Crete, green in spring, golden in late summer, and the palace overlooked it for centuries before it fell. Whatever civilization pressed those symbols into wet clay did so with intention, the tools were prepared, the layout was planned, the message was meant to last. And it did last, 4,000 years, sealed in earth, waiting without urgency for someone to lift it again into the light. There is a calm kind of patience in that, an object that carries its secret lightly, as if time itself does not concern it. Linguists have proposed more than a dozen interpretations over the decades, some careful and scholarly, others imaginative, none conclusive. One researcher suggested the symbols describe a goddess ritual from the Aegean, another read it as a calendar, another as a warrior hymn from a forgotten war. The disc keeps all of these interpretations at equal distance, confirming none, denying none, simply resting in its glass case in Heraklion. Some evenings in Heraklion the light through the museum windows falls at an angle that makes the tiny pressed symbols cast faint shadows, each one briefly deeper. In those moments the disc seems almost on the edge of speaking, the symbols almost forming a shape the eye nearly recognizes, and then the light shifts. Outside the museum, the old streets of Heraklion carry the ordinary sounds of afternoon, a cart, a voice, the distant sea, and the disc waits quietly inside. The sea that laps the southern coast of Crete today is the same sea that moved past Phaistos 4,000 years ago, unchanged in its slow rhythm. Somewhere beneath those waters, other Minoan objects still wait in the silt, other voices from the same vanished world, still uncollected. The Phaistos Disc may be the only one of its kind, or it may be one of many that did not survive, there is no way to know. What remains is this one small circle of baked earth, this one quiet record from a morning 4 millennia gone, still carrying its meaning just out of reach. The palace on the hill above Phaistos catches the last light of afternoon now, its stones warm, its rooms open to the sky, unhurried. And somewhere across the water, the evening settles in slowly, and the old question rests with it, unanswered, untroubled, patient as the disc itself. Far away from the last place we visited, thousands of miles east and many centuries deeper into time, a desert hillside holds a quiet secret. Along the western shore of the Dead Sea, where the land is dry and still and very old, the cliffs rise in gentle terraces above the salt flat water. Somewhere within those cliffs, cut into soft marl and limestone, small caves wait in the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was in one of these caves, many decades ago, that a shepherd came upon something resting in the dust that no one had touched for nearly 2,000 years. The caves of Qumran had already given up their most famous offering, the Dead Sea Scrolls, written on soft parchment and leather, folded carefully away. But in a deeper cave, in the year 1952, archaeologists found something unlike any of the others, a scroll made not of skin or papyrus, but of pure copper. It had oxidized over the long centuries, turning green and brittle, curled into itself like a leaf that had slowly forgotten its original shape. No one could open it without destroying it, so for several years the scroll simply rested, waiting, while scholars quietly debated what to do. Eventually, with great patience and precision, conservators cut the scroll into strips and slowly, gently, read what had been written inside. What they found was a list, a long and careful list, written in Hebrew, describing hiding places. 64 locations, recorded with specific distances and directions, beneath a certain staircase, under a particular tree, at the third course of stones in a ruined wall. And at each location, the scroll described treasure, silver and gold, vessels and coins, measured in talents, in quantities almost too large to believe. The total weight of the described treasure, if taken literally, would amount to an extraordinary fortune, enough to fill an entire room. Scholars read it carefully and then read it again, uncertain whether what they held was a real inventory or something else entirely. The scroll was composed in a plain, almost administrative Hebrew, as if written by someone who simply needed to record facts and nothing more. There is something quietly remarkable about that plainness, no poetry, no prayer, no story, just measurements and directions, matter of fact and calm. The settlement at Qumran itself sits not far from those caves, a compact ruin of stone walls and cisterns baked pale by the desert sun. It was here, some 2,000 years ago, that a small community lived quietly beside the scroll caves, copying texts and keeping to themselves. What became of them, and what they knew of the treasure described on that copper sheet, has never been clearly answered. Some researchers believe the scroll records the hidden wealth of the Jerusalem temple, carried out before the Romans arrived to destroy it. Others believe the quantities described are simply too vast, that the scroll records something imagined, or symbolic, or belonging to a world no longer accessible. And yet the precision of the directions makes that hard to dismiss. Someone took care to write each measurement down with the patience of a person who expected it to be followed. Several of the locations mention places that no longer exist by those names, ruins of ruins, landmarks long dissolved back into the desert ground. Explorers over the decades have followed the directions as best they could, walking the hills near Qumran and the valleys beyond Jericho, finding nothing. The land keeps what it knows very quietly, and the scroll has not yet been proved right or wrong by anything pulled from the earth. The scroll itself now rests in the Jordan Museum in Amman, behind glass, its green copper surface still carrying every letter exactly as it was pressed long ago. It is a strange and gentle thing, to stand near it and understand that whatever it describes may still be out there, undisturbed, resting under stone. The Dead Sea itself is visible from the cliff edges near Qumran, wide and silver in the afternoon, utterly still, the lowest place on the surface of the earth. There is something calming about the scale of this place, the flat water, the pale cliffs, the dry air that has preserved so much for so long. The scroll was made of copper so that it would last. Whoever composed it chose the most durable material they had, as if they knew the message would need to survive a very long time. It has lasted nearly 20 centuries now, which means whoever wrote it was right about that, at least. What remains unanswered is quieter and more open, whether the treasure was real, whether it still waits, whether anyone will ever find the right place to look. For now the scroll holds its directions gently, and the desert holds its silence, and neither one has offered a final word on the matter. And somewhere in that stillness, in the dry warm air above the cliffs and the ancient water far below, the question simply rests, unhurried, open, patient. Far across the world, many thousands of miles from wherever we have just been, there lies a different kind of silence. It is the silence of stone corridors and sun-warmed earth, of a land where great questions have rested for a very long time. Somewhere within that silence, tradition tells us, there once rested an object so sacred that entire civilizations shaped themselves around it. The Ark of the Covenant, as it has come to be known, was said to be a chest of acacia wood, overlaid entirely in gold. Its dimensions, as recorded in ancient texts, were modest, roughly the size of a large wooden trunk that two men might carry between them. Yet within that modest form, the old writings say, rested the tablets of stone upon which were carved the laws given at Sinai. Two golden figures, their wings spread and touching overhead, were said to stand upon its lid, bowing gently toward each other. For centuries, this object was carried through the wilderness, sheltered beneath a great tent, and kept hidden from ordinary eyes. In time, it found a home within the temple at Jerusalem, in the innermost chamber where only one priest might enter, and only once each year. That chamber was called the Holy of Holies, and it was draped in thick curtains and held in a stillness that few human beings ever knew. And then, at some quiet point in history that no single record fully captures, the Ark simply was no longer there. The Temple of Solomon was destroyed, the city fell, and when the dust had settled across the centuries, the Ark was not among the things accounted for. There is no agreed moment of disappearance, no confirmed last sighting, only the gentle accumulation of silence where records once were. Some older traditions hold that the Ark was carried away before the temple fell, hidden by those who understood what was coming. Ethiopian tradition, ancient and unbroken across many generations, says the Ark traveled south long before any Babylonian army arrived. According to that telling, a son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba carried it across the Red Sea and into the highlands of Aksum. In the ancient city of Aksum, there stands today a small stone chapel beside a great cathedral, and within it, something is kept that visitors are never permitted to see. A single monk is appointed to guard whatever rests inside, and that appointment lasts for the remainder of his life. No photograph has been taken of the interior, no outside authority has been permitted to examine what is held there. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church does not invite investigation, and in that quiet refusal, the question simply rests, unanswered. Other traditions carry the Ark elsewhere, to a cave beneath the Temple Mount, sealed away in the moments before the Great Siege began. There are those who point to old texts suggesting underground chambers were constructed precisely for the safekeeping of sacred objects in times of danger. Excavations beneath and around Jerusalem have uncovered layer upon layer of history, each one resting gently on the shoulders of the last. Yet no excavation has reported finding anything that might be the Ark, and the earth beneath the city keeps its own slow counsel. There is another tradition, quieter and older feeling, that says the Ark was never lost at all, that it waits, simply hidden, for a moment not yet arrived. The weight of all these traditions together does not resolve the question, it only deepens the feeling that the question itself is very old. What we do know is that the Ark was real enough to those who carried it, who feared it, who shaped their laws and their lives around its presence. That kind of reality does not simply disappear, it settles into the earth and the stone and the very old air of certain places. Perhaps it rests tonight somewhere in warm stone, in dry highland air, in a small chapel that has held its silence across 1,000 years. Or perhaps it lies beneath old ground that no one has yet thought to look, in a chamber sealed by hands that trusted the future would understand. The question drifts, as old questions do, without urgency, without demand, like dust motes in a beam of afternoon light falling across worn stone. Somewhere, in dry warm air, in quiet and in shadow, the answer may simply be resting, patient, still, unhurried as the stone itself. And that patience, after so many centuries, has a quality almost like peace, like something that has long since stopped needing to be found. Let the mind rest here, in that warm stillness, with no need to resolve what has drifted quietly through so many sleeping centuries before us. Somewhere beyond the open grasslands, where stone meets sky and the wind forgets its hurry, there lies a story carried quietly through centuries. Far to the east, in the vast highland plains of Mongolia, the earth holds a secret it has kept for nearly 800 years. This is the story of Genghis Khan, the great conqueror, whose burial place remains one of the most gently persistent mysteries the ancient world has ever offered. He ruled an empire so wide that horses could gallop for weeks without reaching its edge, yet when he died, the world was asked to forget where he was laid to rest. According to the oldest accounts, his warriors carried him home across 1,000 miles of silent, wind-smoothed land. The procession moved slowly, they say, as rivers of autumn move, without urgency, without announcement, through valleys no road had yet named. All who witnessed the journey were silenced, not by command alone, but by the weight of what they carried through the golden grasses. The burial itself, when it came, was performed in deep privacy, under open sky, far from any city or settlement. There are accounts that 10,000 horses were driven across the grave to erase its shape from the earth, returning the ground to something seamless and ordinary. Slowly, grasses grew back, and seasons turned over the place, and the land remembered nothing that it chose to show. Some accounts speak of a river diverted across the site, its water smoothing and settling every trace into the quiet basin of forgetting. The mountain called Burkhan Khaldun is spoken of in the oldest Mongolian chronicles as a place Genghis Khan held sacred from his earliest years. He had sheltered there once as a young man, hidden from enemies in the deep folds of pine and stone, and he never forgot it. The mountain was declared forbidden ground in his own lifetime, a circle of protected silence drawn around it that widened with each passing generation. Even now, Burkhan Khaldun is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the inner region is closed to excavation by Mongolian law and by the wish of the land itself. Archaeologists have searched the surrounding terrain for generations, mapping the plateau with quiet patience, reading the soil for signs that never quite arrive. Satellite images have been studied carefully, layer by layer, showing ancient earthworks and buried shapes that raise a question and then leave it hanging. One candidate site, known informally among researchers as the Forbidden Zone, sits within a landscape that has barely changed since the 13th century. There, among river bends and ridgelines, the earth holds its particular kind of stillness, neither revealing nor refusing, simply present and unhurried. Teams from Japan, from the United States, from Mongolia itself have quietly surveyed the region with tools that see beneath the ground without disturbing it. What they have found are underground anomalies, shapes that do not match the natural geology, that suggest something was once placed deliberately and carefully below. And yet the tomb itself, if it is there, has not been opened, and perhaps it never will be, held in place by a combination of law, respect, and the weight of time. There is something quietly extraordinary about a civilization powerful enough to conquer half the world choosing, in the end, to be swallowed completely by it. Slowly, in the centuries after his death, the legends thickened around the site, each one slightly different, each one pointing in a direction just around the corner from the last. Some said he was buried with his greatest treasures, others that the grave was intentionally plain, indistinguishable from any other patch of steppe grass. There is a medieval account that 80 slaves dug the tomb, and that when the work was done, they were killed so that the secret would not travel further than the ground. Whether true or not, such stories shaped the way people approached the search in later centuries, always with a sense that the place was protecting itself. In time, the Mongol Empire itself dissolved and its heartland returned to something quieter, the cities unmade, the roads grown over, the old markers weathered to smoothness. What remains is the landscape itself, the Kentai Mountains still standing as they stood, the rivers still following the same patient courses. Far away from crowds and questions, the region breathes with the slow rhythm of a place that has outlasted every attempt to fully understand it. The tomb, wherever it rests, is held in that same stillness, returned to the land, neither found nor fully lost, simply somewhere beneath the ordinary light. Perhaps, in the end, that was the intention all along, not concealment born of fear, but a return so complete that the earth and the man became the same thing. And so the steppe continues, patient and unhurried, carrying its secret the way water carries the color of the sky, without effort, without end. Somewhere out there, beneath the wind and the grass and the slow turn of the seasons, the great Khan rests in a silence that the world has never quite been able to find. The hour has drifted a little later now, and somewhere across the quiet night, a new place gently comes into view. In the heart of London, inside the great stone halls of the British Museum, there rests an object unlike almost anything else on Earth. It is a human skull, carved entirely from a single piece of clear, polished rock crystal, and it sits in quiet stillness behind glass. The crystal is flawless, catching the gentle light of the room and holding it inside itself like something remembered from very long ago. No one has ever been entirely certain where it came from, or who made it, or how many centuries have passed since the first hands shaped it. The skull arrived at the British Museum in 1897, brought by a man named Henry Tompkins who claimed to have purchased it somewhere in Mexico. Before that, its trail grows faint, passing through the hands of a French collector and then dissolving quietly into the past. For many decades after it arrived, people looked at the skull and wondered if the ancient Aztec people of Mexico had carved it centuries before the Spanish came. The Aztecs and other Mesoamerican peoples did venerate the skull as a symbol, carving it in stone and bone and jade across many generations. So when a skull appeared, made with such breathtaking precision from pure crystal, it seemed to carry the weight of all that ancient meaning with it. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the jaw was carved separately and fitted so precisely that it moved, almost as though the skull had once been meant to speak. Inside the crystal, tiny channels had been hollowed out along the eye sockets and across the roof of the skull, as if meant to carry light deep within. If you placed a candle or lantern beneath it, the light would travel up through those hidden channels and glow softly from the empty eye sockets. Scientists who examined it found no obvious tool marks on its surface, and for a long time this deepened the quiet mystery of how it had been made. Rock crystal, which is simply a very pure form of quartz, ranks among the hardest natural substances found on the surface of the Earth. Shaping it into the precise curves and hollow spaces of a human skull, without cracking or shattering it, would require immense patience and skill. The question of who possessed that skill, and when, was one that researchers at the museum quietly turned over for many years. In 1992, small samples from the skull were analyzed by scientists using electron microscopy, a method that can read the surface of a carved object like a slow, careful map. What they found, very slowly and carefully, was evidence of rotary wheel tools, instruments that did not exist in the ancient Americas before the Europeans arrived. This finding arrived quietly, and it changed the way the skull was understood, not an Aztec relic from deep antiquity, but something made much more recently. The current understanding places its creation somewhere in 19th century Europe, likely carved by skilled craftsmen in Germany or France during a period of great fascination with ancient things. And yet, even knowing this, the object does not become lesser, it becomes, in some ways, more quietly strange. Someone made it with enormous care and extraordinary skill, someone who understood light and anatomy and the slow patience of working in stone. And then it passed, quietly and without much documentation, from one pair of hands to another, each owner perhaps knowing a little less than the one before. By the time it reached the British Museum, its origins had already softened into story, the kind of story that settles quietly over an object like dust over old furniture. Visitors have stood before it for more than 100 years, and many of them have felt something move slowly through them, a feeling not easily named. The skull watches the room with its empty crystal eyes, unchanged by the passing centuries, catching the light of each new morning with the same stillness. There is something in the weight of it, both the physical weight of the stone and the other kind, that seems to ask a question no one has yet fully answered. Even the source of the crystal itself has never been pinned down with certainty, no quartz deposit has been matched to the specific mineral composition of this skull. The stone could have come from Brazil, or from the Alps, or from somewhere else entirely. The crystal does not say where it began its long, slow journey. It sits now in room 24 of the museum, surrounded by other objects from ancient Mexico, patient and cool and quietly unhurried by any of our questions. Outside the museum's stone walls, the city moves and hums and changes, but inside the glass the skull rests in the same deep silence it has always kept. Perhaps that is the truest thing that can be said about it, not where it came from or who made it, but simply that it remains, still and clear and full of held light. And so the night drifts on, and the skull rests in its quiet room, and the light inside it holds perfectly still, the way all beautiful mysteries tend to do. A soft wind moves across the Aegean Sea, carrying the faint smell of salt and old stone, settling the mind into a quieter place. In Istanbul, in a palace library, a folded piece of gazelle skin rested for centuries without anyone quite knowing what it held. When scholars finally unfolded it in 1929, they found a map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. The map was beautifully made, its coastlines drawn in colored inks that had barely faded across 400 years. Europe and Africa appeared along the top, their shapes recognizable and carefully rendered. South America curved down the center, its Atlantic coast drawn with surprising accuracy for a time before reliable navigation. But it was the bottom of the map that made the scholars go very quiet. Along the southern edge, a long and jagged coastline ran east to west, forming the outline of a continent. Antarctica, as we know it today, would not be officially discovered for another 300 years. Piri Reis himself wrote notes in the margins, saying he had compiled the map from older sources, some of great antiquity. He mentioned charts once held by Christopher Columbus, and other maps whose origins he could not fully trace. There is something quietly strange about holding a document that points back toward knowledge we no longer know we lost. The map rested on the table of the palace library, a modest thing, drawn in the hand of one careful man. Outside the palace walls, the Bosphorus moved slowly, as it always had, indifferent to what the map suggested. Slowly, over the following decades, cartographers began measuring the southern coastline on the map against what satellites would later show. Some coordinates matched, not perfectly, but closely enough to make anyone pause in quiet thought. Others pointed out the distortions, the places where the outline wandered far from any known shore. And yet the question remained, hanging softly in the air the way old questions do in old rooms. Who had first charted that frozen southern shore, and how long before Piri Reis was born had they done it? Some researchers imagined ancient sailors moving slowly through unmapped waters, using instruments we have not yet found. Others wondered about the accumulated knowledge of Alexandria, libraries full of charts that burned or simply disappeared. The Library of Alexandria once held scrolls from across the known world, and no one is entirely sure what was in them. It is a gentle kind of mystery, one that does not demand an answer, only a moment of wondering. The map itself is small, smaller than most people imagine, its lines drawn with a steady and unhurried hand. A compass rose floats near the center of the map, its arms reaching outward toward every direction at once. Illustrated sea creatures drift through the ocean spaces, unhurried, belonging to a world that took the sea seriously. The colors in the map, ochre and soft blue and faded red, have the warmth of something made by hand with care. Piri Reis was an admiral who had sailed the Mediterranean many times, a man who understood how maps were built from other maps. He was careful to write down his sources, a rarity for his time, a gift left quietly for those who came later. The gazelle skin on which he drew has survived wars and fires and the long forgetting of centuries. It rested in a cupboard in Topkapi Palace for over 400 years, folded and still, waiting without urgency. Even now, the map remains more question than answer, sitting quietly in its archive, holding its edges close. Far to the south, Antarctica lies under its white silence, as old as anything on Earth, not telling. And somewhere between the Admiral's careful hand and that distant frozen coast, the question drifts on, unhurried. Somewhere far away, there is only the sound of wind moving slowly across ancient stone, and nothing else. High above the city of Cusco, in the thin cool air of the Peruvian Andes, a great fortress rests quietly on a hillside. The stones here are enormous, some weighing as much as 120 tons, fitted together without a single drop of mortar. They have rested in exactly this position for over 500 years, undisturbed by centuries of rain and frost and earthquake. The walls rise in three great terrace tiers, their edges cut at gentle angles so each enormous block nestles into its neighbor like a sleeping thing finding its place. When the Inca built this place, they had no iron tools, no wheels, no draft animals capable of pulling such weight across mountain terrain. Yet somehow, stone by stone, the fortress came to be, rising quietly above the valley the way a mountain simply is. The largest individual stones were quarried miles away, at a place called Wakoto, and carried somehow across deep ravines and rising slopes. No one has ever found a complete record of how this was done, and the question drifts unanswered through the thin mountain air. Some of the blocks are cut with as many as 12 distinct angles, each face precisely matched to the stone beside it. Running a hand along those joints, even now, one finds no gap wide enough to slip a piece of paper through. Historians have long suggested the Inca used ramps of earth and timber, thousands of workers pulling together with ropes of braided fiber. It is a reasonable answer, and it may well be true, yet it leaves something quietly unresolved in the mind. Because even with 10,000 workers and all the ropes in the empire, the geometry of these stones is something else entirely. Each block is unique, no two alike in shape, and each was made to fit one specific place and no other. Slow clouds pass overhead, casting moving shadows across the pale stone, and the fortress simply waits, as it has always waited. The Inca called this place Sacsayhuaman, a name that carries in it the sound of the wind across its open ceremonial grounds. In the time of the Inca Empire, this was a place of great ceremony, where the sun was honored at the winter solstice. Now the grounds are very still, and the only movement is the slow drift of light as the sun travels its familiar arc. Somewhere within the fortress there were once towers, and halls with thatched roofs, and rooms that held the empire's treasures. Most of those structures were dismantled by Spanish colonizers in the years after the conquest, their stones carried down the hill to build the city below. What remains are the lower walls, the bones of the fortress, and they are enough to quiet the mind entirely. Geologists have noted that the limestone used here was formed over millions of years, compressed slowly beneath ancient seafloors. That stone, so old it carries within it the memory of ancient oceans, was lifted and shaped by human hands on a high Andean ridge. And there is something in that contrast, between the immense age of the stone and the human care in its shaping, that is very peaceful to hold in the mind. The afternoon light falls at a low angle across the zigzag ramparts, and each protrusion casts a soft shadow onto the stone beside it. Those zigzag lines were once thought to represent the teeth of a great puma, the sacred animal of the Inca, watching over the valley. Whether or not that was the intention, the shape of the walls does carry something alive in it, something that does not quite let the eye rest. As the sun drops lower toward the Andean horizon, the shadows deepen slowly between the stone courses, and the fortress seems to breathe. For 5 centuries, the fortress has endured earthquakes that toppled other buildings in the valley below, its unlocked stones moving slightly and then settling again. There is a kind of wisdom in that design, though whose wisdom it was and how fully they understood it remains a quiet open question. The grass around the fortress grows slowly in the thin altitude air, and small birds move through it without any hurry at all. The stones are very still now, and the questions that surround them are very still too, resting without any need for answer. And somewhere in the thin cool air above the valley, the wind moves slowly across the stone, and everything is very quiet. Somewhere far above the turning world, the mind drifts slowly eastward, settling down over the warm plains of northern India. In the heart of Delhi, within a courtyard of pale sandstone, there stands a column of iron that has not rusted in 1600 years. It rises quietly to about 7 meters, smooth and dark, tapering gently toward a rounded finial at its crown. The pillar simply stands, patient and still, as pigeons drift past and the light moves slowly across its surface through the hours. Around it, the ruins of older temples and mosques rise in soft layers of red and cream stone, worn gently by centuries of wind. Yet the pillar itself is unmarked by rust, its iron surface as intact today as it was when it was first raised in the Gupta age. An inscription near its base, in an old form of Sanskrit, tells us it was made to honor a king named Chandra, long ago. Scholars believe this Chandra was a Gupta emperor, a ruler of great power who may have raised the pillar as a standard or a memorial. In those years, the 5th century of the Common Era, craftsmen in India had learned to work iron with a skill the world would not surpass for a very long time. To forge a single column of nearly pure iron, 6 tons of it, without furnaces that could melt the metal, was itself a quiet marvel. The craftsmen appear to have hammered small pieces of hot iron together, layering and joining them over many hours into one cohesive whole. And in that careful, unhurried process, they seem to have produced something unusual, a composition of iron that the open air could barely touch. The surface has developed over the centuries a thin dark layer, a kind of mineral skin, that locks the iron beneath away from moisture. This quiet protective film formed slowly, year by year, in the dry air of the Delhi plain, building itself without any human intention. The pillar has stood through monsoons and droughts, through the rise and fall of many kingdoms, and still it does not rust. At some point, long after the Gupta age, the pillar was moved here to this courtyard, though no one recorded exactly when or how. It may have stood originally at a different site, perhaps a temple or a royal garden, before finding this resting place among newer ruins. By the 12th century, a great tower of stone called the Qutb Minar rose nearby, and the iron pillar stood quietly at its foot. Travelers and merchants who passed through Delhi over the centuries noted the pillar with a kind of soft wonder, uncertain what to make of it. Some believed it had been there since the beginning of time, or that it had fallen from the sky, so perfect did its preservation seem. In the old folk tradition of the place, it was said that if you could stand with your back to the pillar and reach your arms around it, your wish would be granted. The base of the pillar is decorated with a carved capital, and beneath it rests a low stone plinth worn smooth by very many hands over the years. The inscription that wraps the column is not just a dedication, it is a poem, praising the king's courage in flowing classical verse. Slowly, the language in which it was written fell out of daily use, and the poem became a quiet riddle waiting for later scholars to read. Even now, after careful study, some lines of the inscription carry meanings that scholars read differently, a gentle ambiguity across the centuries. The pillar itself seems unbothered by any of this, standing in its courtyard as the seasons turn and the light changes slowly around it. In the early morning, mist sometimes gathers low across the courtyard, and the pillar stands above it, dark and calm and very still. By midday the stone around it is warm, the air is dry, and the iron surface holds a faint subdued gleam in the flat bright light. And in the evening, as the sun drops below the western ruins, the pillar catches a last long streak of warm color before the sky deepens. It has seen perhaps 1,500 such evenings for every year of its existence, a patient witness to the slow drift of time. No one alive knows the names of the men who made it, or the exact fires they kept, or the tools they turned in their hands. Those details sank quietly into the past, as most things do, leaving only the object itself as a kind of soft, enduring question. The question is not urgent, not demanding, just gently present, the way the pillar itself is present, unhurried in its courtyard beneath the open sky. And so it remains, as the light continues to move across the plain of Delhi, as it has always moved, slowly and without hurry. Somewhere far from the cold of the last story, the air grows warmer, thick with the scent of ancient stone baked slowly under a Middle Eastern sun. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, nestled between two mountain ranges, lies a place that has quietly puzzled people for a very long time. Here, at Baalbek, stand the remains of one of the largest temple complexes ever built by human hands on this earth. 6 enormous columns still rise from the earth, each one so tall that a person standing beside them seems almost to disappear. The stone is a pale warm amber in the morning light, smooth in places, roughened in others by 2,000 years of wind and rain. What the Romans built here was extraordinary, and yet the Romans themselves may not have chosen this place by chance. Beneath the Roman temple, engineers discovered a foundation platform built from stones so large they barely seem possible. 3 of these foundation stones, known simply as the trilithon, are among the largest cut stones ever placed anywhere on Earth. Each one stretches nearly 19 meters in length and weighs somewhere near 800 tons, resting there with a quiet, settled permanence. They sit fitted together so precisely that a thin blade of grass would struggle to find a gap between them. A little distance away, still lying in a quarry in the hillside, is a stone that was never moved at all. It is called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and it is larger still than any of the trilithon blocks above. In more recent years, another even larger stone was uncovered nearby, resting quietly beneath the soil as if it had simply decided to remain. This stone may weigh over 1,000 tons, making it perhaps the heaviest block ever intended for construction anywhere in the ancient world. Nobody knows how the builders of this place intended to move a stone that heavy, or even how the smaller ones were moved. The quarry sits roughly a kilometer from the temple site, across ground that slopes and dips in ways that make the journey feel improbable. Ancient writers recorded the site as a place of great power and reverence long before the Romans arrived to build their temples. The Romans called it Heliopolis, City of the Sun, and dedicated it to Jupiter, the sky god, whose domain was light and open heaven. Yet the platform they built upon already existed, and the enormous stones below their work belonged to a tradition much older and less understood. Slowly, as you let the image settle, the scale of the lower stones becomes something the mind has difficulty holding all at once. Engineers and archaeologists have studied the site for well over a century and still cannot agree on how the stones were quarried, shaped, and placed. Some have suggested ramps of packed earth, or sledges, or systems of rollers laid across the valley floor like a slow procession. Others point quietly to the fact that even modern cranes, the largest ever built, would strain to lift a single trilithon stone. In the long afternoon, when the light turns golden and the shadows of the columns stretch slowly across the paving stones, the place grows very still. The carved detail on the surviving columns is fine and careful, vines and acanthus leaves frozen in stone for 2 millennia. Nearby, the smaller temple of Bacchus stands more intact, its doorway framed by carved reliefs that have outlasted every kingdom that ever claimed this valley. Inside, the ceiling coffers are still visible, geometric patterns that once would have been painted and gilded, catching the light from open doorways. The valley around the site is very green in the cooler months, the mountains holding the last snow far above while the ruins warm in the valley sun. In time, the Romans left, and other peoples came, and the stones remained, too heavy to take and too large to ignore. Earthquakes have toppled many of the original columns, and they lie now in great sections across the temple courtyard like a slow conversation interrupted. And yet the 6 that remain standing have weathered every tremor, every century, every long and quiet night without falling. Far below them, the trilithon stones hold the earth with the same patience they have always held it, neither asking nor offering explanation. The question of who first placed them there, and how, and with what intention, drifts gently through the warm Baka air without ever quite settling. And somewhere beneath the stone, beneath the valley, beneath the slow turning of the seasons, the answer rests in a silence that asks nothing of us at all. Somewhere in the ancient world, there is a place called Babylon, and its gardens have drifted quietly through history like a half-remembered dream. For thousands of years, people have searched for exactly where those gardens once stood, and the answer has never settled into certainty. The Euphrates River still moves slowly through the land that was once Babylonia, its brown waters carrying soil from mountains far away. Along its banks, the ruins of the old city rest quietly beneath centuries of sand and silence. Ancient writers described the gardens as something that rose above the city in terraced layers, green and impossible, hanging in the dry air. They said water was somehow lifted from the river far below, flowing upward through the garden in a continuous, gentle stream. The image is peaceful and strange, green terraces rising above a flat, sun-baked city of mud brick and dust. But when scholars came to find the gardens, they found only foundation stones and silence, and the exact location began to blur. The Greek historian Strabo placed them near the royal palace, beside the river, where the air might carry the sound of water. Diodorus of Sicily wrote of their beauty with quiet confidence, as though he had seen them himself, though he probably never had. Philo of Byzantium listed the gardens among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, placing them gently alongside temples and colossal statues. And yet none of these writers seem to have stood inside Babylon themselves and felt the shade of those green terraces above. The Babylonian records that survive, the careful clay tablets baked in the sun, do not mention the gardens at all. Thousands of tablets have been read, cataloging grain and wool and cattle, but no gardener left a note about hanging terraces. This silence in the Babylonian records is one of the softer mysteries, not dramatic, but quietly puzzling, like a missing page. Some historians have suggested the gardens may not have been in Babylon at all, but in another great city to the north. Nineveh, the city of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, sat along the Tigris River, surrounded by a different kind of landscape. Sennacherib left detailed inscriptions describing a remarkable garden he had built, one that he called a wonder for all people. He described trees brought from distant mountains, water raised by a machine of bronze, and terraces that held the sky above them. The scholar Stephanie Daly spent many quiet years examining these inscriptions, and she came to believe this was the garden everyone had been searching for. If she is right, then for 2,000 years the gardens were simply in the wrong city on every map. The Tigris at Nineveh flows a little differently than the Euphrates, faster in places, green along its edges in spring. It is easy, standing by that river in the early light, to imagine a machine lifting water slowly upward into terraced green. But the question remains open, resting somewhere between Babylon and Nineveh like dust settling after a long journey. The land itself offers few answers, flat and dry now, patient under the sun, holding whatever it knows quietly beneath. Archaeological teams have worked carefully through the layers of Babylon, noting every brick pattern, every drainage channel, every trace of a foundation. They have found the palace, the processional way, the great temple, but the gardens still drift just out of reach. Perhaps the gardens were built of wood and living earth, materials that do not survive the way stone does, leaving only their memory. A garden built of soil and roots and flowing water might simply return to soil again, without a single stone to mark its passing. The Euphrates itself has shifted course many times over the centuries, quietly rerouting itself away from the old city. What once stood at the water's edge may now lie beneath the river itself, under the slow brown current. There is something restful about a mystery that does not demand to be solved, that simply asks to be held gently in mind. The gardens may have been in Babylon, or in Nineveh, or somewhere in between, green and watered and real to those who walked beneath them. And slowly, if you let your thoughts drift with the river, the question of where they stood begins to matter a little less. A pale Atlantic light rests on the water's surface, soft and silver, neither morning nor afternoon, simply still. Somewhere in that quiet expanse, in the winter of 1872, a brigantine named Mary Celeste moved slowly eastward under full sail. She was a well-built vessel, solid and reliable, carrying commercial alcohol cargo from New York toward the port of Genoa. Her captain, Benjamin Briggs, was a careful and experienced man who had brought his wife and young daughter along for the voyage. Nothing about the departure from New York in early November suggested anything unusual, just another merchant voyage across a familiar sea. Then, on the 4th of December, a British brigantine called Dei Grazia sighted something unexpected drifting on the calm Azores Sea. The Mary Celeste was moving, but strangely, erratically, her sails set in a way that made no sense for her heading. The crew of Dei Grazia signaled her, called across the water, and waited, but no one answered from her deck. When sailors boarded her, they found everything in place, the galley with its pots, the cabins with their belongings, the cargo undisturbed. A meal seemed to have been recently begun, or perhaps set aside for just a moment, as though someone had simply stepped away. The captain's log lay open, the last entry dated 10 days before the day Grazia found her, noting only fair weather and steady progress. The chronometer and sextant were gone, tools a captain might take if he expected to navigate away from the ship in a lifeboat. The single lifeboat was missing from its davits, leaving only the empty iron brackets where it had hung above the sea. But no lifeboat was ever found, and no trace of the 10 people who had been aboard her ever surfaced in any port. The sea around the ship was undisturbed, no wreckage, no debris, as if the crew had simply dissolved into the mild December air. One of the more curious details was the cargo itself, 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, nearly all intact. 9 of those barrels were found to be empty, but there was no sign of spillage, no dampness, no smell of alcohol below deck. Investigators in Gibraltar examined her carefully for weeks, looking for any sign of violence, fire, or collision, and found none. The hull was sound, the pumps working, the compass still mounted in its binnacle, the sails capable of carrying her onward. Slowly, the questions multiplied without answers, each reasonable explanation quietly dissolving when examined closely in the Gibraltar courtroom. Piracy seemed unlikely, for nothing of value had been taken, not the cargo, not the navigational instruments left behind. Mutiny seemed equally hard to imagine for a crew described as steady men with no known grievances against their captain. Over the years, a gentler theory settled into the telling, that perhaps the empty barrels had released a small cloud of vapor. Perhaps Briggs, cautious man that he was, had ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a temporary measure, to wait clear of the ship. And perhaps the rope tethering the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste had simply parted in a quiet swell, and the ship drifted gently away. It is a calm and reasonable explanation, and yet no one can say for certain, because no one who was there ever told the story. The Mary Celeste was eventually repaired and returned to service, sailing on under new crews for 12 more years without incident. She ended her days deliberately wrecked on a reef off Haiti in 1885, a commercial fraud her final chapter. But what happened on those 10 missing days in December remains as open and unanswered as the Atlantic horizon she crossed. In time, the story passed from Admiralty records into something quieter, a tale people returned to in the evening, turning it slowly in their minds. The ship's name itself became a kind of shorthand, not for danger or disaster, but for the particular mystery of an absence. Everything was there except the people, the beds, the cups, the open log, the steady compass pointing calmly toward a destination no one reached. The Atlantic keeps its own record, somewhere beneath those long, pale swells, in water too deep and wide to ever be fully read. And so the Mary Celeste drifts on through the years, neither solved nor forgotten, resting somewhere in the quiet between one wave and the next. From the open land, the earth itself seems to breathe slowly, and somewhere beneath that stillness, stone waits in the quiet dark below. In the eastern province of Zhejiang, China, a quiet village sits beside a modest reservoir that has held its water for many decades. The village is called Shurian, and it has always been a gentle place, surrounded by low hills and the slow pace of agricultural life. For generations, the people of Shurian lived and worked beside that reservoir without giving much thought to what might rest beneath its surface. Then one autumn, a local man named Wu An'ai decided to pump the water from one of the ponds near his land, perhaps searching for fish or simply curious. As the water level slowly dropped, something unexpected began to emerge from below the surface of that ordinary pond. The outline of a vast underground space appeared beneath what had seemed like simple muddy ground, its ceiling soaring high above the waterline. Neighbors came to look, and then more neighbors, and word spread slowly through the village that something very old and very large lay hidden under the earth here. In the following weeks, more ponds were drained, and with each one a new chamber opened beneath the earth, vast and carved and silent. Eventually 5 enormous caverns were uncovered, and then more, until the count reached 24 separate underground spaces of extraordinary scale. Each cave had been cut entirely by hand into the soft siltstone bedrock, their walls rising in graceful curves to heights of nearly 30 meters. The ceilings, walls, and floors all carry the same carefully angled chisel marks, a diagonal pattern repeated with extraordinary consistency throughout every chamber. These marks are not random or rough but precise and deliberate, as though the artisans who made them followed a shared intention across every surface. The caves are enormous in their combined footprint, covering an area larger than many great halls and temples that ancient China is known for. And yet no ancient record mentions them, no imperial chronicle, no regional history, no stone inscription found anywhere nearby. They seem to have existed and then simply been forgotten, as though the earth quietly closed over them and time moved on without a word. Archaeologists who studied the caves after their discovery found no tools left behind, no lamps, no debris, nothing that might explain how the work was done. The scale of stone removed from each chamber would have required immense effort and organization over a very long period of time. Estimates have placed the total stone removed at over 1 million cubic meters, an undertaking comparable to the largest ancient construction projects in the world. And yet the removed stone itself has never been found nearby, which leaves one more quiet question drifting unanswered beneath the hills. The caves are not randomly placed but positioned with careful spacing, as though their arrangement followed some design whose logic we can no longer fully read. Stone pillars were left standing at intervals through the chambers, not by accident, but deliberately, as though they were part of a considered structural plan. The pillars are not decorated but plain, and their plainness somehow makes them feel more permanent, more considered, more deeply rooted in the earth. Standing inside one of the larger chambers, a visitor feels the quiet weight of the stone above, an immense and patient presence that has waited for a very long time. The air inside is cool and still, and the silence there is the kind that feels old, the kind that has not been disturbed for generations. Some researchers have suggested the caves may date to the Qin dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, though the evidence remains gentle and inconclusive. Others have offered different possibilities, different dynasties, different purposes, and the conversation continues quietly among those who study such things. No one has yet offered an explanation that satisfies all the questions the caves quietly ask of us. What they were used for, whether storage or shelter or ceremony or something else entirely, remains an open and unhurried question. In the years since their discovery, the caves have been studied and partly preserved, and some are open now to those who wish to walk quietly through them. Visitors who walk through them describe a feeling of deep stillness, as though the space itself holds a kind of patience that has nothing to do with ordinary time. Outside, the hills of Zhejiang continue their slow existence under the passing seasons, unhurried by the questions resting just beneath their surface. The earth here holds its silence easily, as it always has, letting the mystery remain exactly where it has always rested, beneath the quiet and the stone. And somewhere far below the ordinary light of day, the carved walls wait in their patient stillness, unchanged, unhurried, and softly unresolved. The night has drifted a little deeper now, and somewhere far to the east, across quiet mountains, a vast plateau waits in the soft dark. This is the Plain of Jars, a wide and gentle highland in the heart of Laos, where the grass grows pale gold in the dry season and the mist settles low each morning. And scattered across this plain, as far as the eye can slowly travel, stand hundreds upon hundreds of enormous stone jars. They sit in clusters, half sunk into the red earth, as though they have always been here, older than any memory the land can hold. Some are small enough to kneel beside, and others rise taller than a standing person, carved from solid stone in a single quiet form. Nobody built walls here, nobody left a temple or a palace, only these jars, resting in the open air beneath the wide Laotian sky. The stone itself comes in several kinds, sandstone and limestone and a harder rock called granite, each jar shaped patiently, without mortar, without seam. Many jars have lids, thick stone discs that once rested across their openings, and a few of these lids still lie nearby in the grass. When archaeologists first arrived to study the site carefully, they found traces of human bone and ash inside some of the jars. This suggested, gently and without certainty, that the jars may once have held the remains of the dead, used in some long-forgotten burial tradition. But no one knows for certain, and the jars themselves say nothing, standing in their patient rows as they have for perhaps 2,000 years. The people who made them left no writing, no clear record, only the stone itself and the soft contours of the land around it. Local tradition holds a different story, one that speaks of a great king named Qumran, who is said to have feasted here with his victorious army. According to the old tales, the jars were made to brew and hold rice wine, enough to celebrate a victory that shook the mountains. The story carries the warmth of something told beside a fire, and it stays with you as you walk slowly between the jars at dusk. There are more than 2,000 jars spread across at least 90 separate sites, scattered across the plateau like a language no one can read. Some clusters have only a handful of jars, sitting together quietly on a gentle slope, and others spread across wide clearings in their dozens. Site 1, the largest and most visited, holds more than 300 jars, and walking among them feels like moving through a slow, silent gathering. The plateau itself sits at over 1,000 meters above the sea, and the air there has a cool, clean quality that slows everything down. In the rainy season, clouds move low and slow across the plain, and the jars appear and disappear in the rising mist like something half-remembered. One of the quietest things about this place is that even the largest jar was carved, somehow, from stone quarried far away and carried here. How those enormous weights moved across the hills remains one of the plain's gentlest puzzles, answered differently by every scholar who has considered it. The 20th century brought something heavier to this land, and the plateau carries the memory of it still in the soil and in the silence. During the long years of the Indochina conflict, the plain was heavily bombed, and unexploded ordnance still rests beneath parts of the surrounding earth. Yet the jars themselves survived, most of them, enduring the decades of turmoil as they had endured every century before. They were listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the year 2019, acknowledged by the wider world at last. But recognition changes nothing about the quiet mystery at the center of this place, which remains as open and unheld as the sky above it. Researchers continue to work carefully here, sifting the soil around the jars, cataloging, measuring, listening to what the earth is willing to offer. Sometimes small artifacts surface, glass beads, bronze ornaments, fragments of ceramics that hint at a culture of care and ceremony. And yet the full picture never quite assembles itself, always missing one piece, always leaving a soft and restful space where certainty might have been. The jars do not ask to be understood, they only ask to be visited slowly, walked among, given a little time in the quiet afternoon. In the long blue evenings, the shadows of the jars stretch out across the pale grass, and the plateau grows very still. The questions remain, as they always have, held loosely in the cool highland air, not urgent, not pressing, simply present. And the plain rests, as it has rested for 2,000 years, under the turning stars, keeping whatever it knows gently to itself. A soft warm wind moves through the coastal lowlands of southern Mexico, carrying the faint smell of river clay and distant rain. Somewhere beneath that warm air, half buried in the soft earth of a place called San Lorenzo, enormous stone faces have rested for 3,000 years. They are very old, older than most things we tend to call ancient, carved from basalt by a civilization whose name we have never truly learned. The Olmec, as scholars now call them, shaped these massive heads with nothing more than stone tools and an extraordinary patience we can barely imagine. Each face is unique, a distinct portrait, perhaps of a ruler, perhaps of someone whose story has dissolved entirely into time. San Lorenzo itself sits on a plateau above the Coatzacoalcos River, a quiet elevated place where the land rises gently above the surrounding marshes. From up there, on a still morning, you can hear the river below before you can see it, a low, continuous sound beneath everything else. The stone heads were not found here in a tidy row, they were scattered, half sunk, some turned face down in the earth as though deliberately placed that way. When the first modern explorers described them in the 19th century, people back in distant cities could barely believe what was being described. A head taller than a person, wider than a doorway, made of stone that came from mountains 60 miles away, the description seemed almost impossible. The basalt was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, far to the north, and somehow carried across rivers and marshland to this plateau. No one is entirely certain how they moved such weight. Some suggest rafts on the river, others speak of great organized human effort across the land. Whatever the method, the effort required must have been enormous, a devotion of energy that tells us these faces mattered deeply to whoever made them. The helmet-like headgear each figure wears has been studied closely, each one slightly different, as though marking a particular person or lineage. Some researchers believe these are portraits of Olmec rulers, the faces of real people rendered in stone so they would never be entirely forgotten. And yet the Olmec left no written record of who these faces represent, no inscription, no name, nothing that has survived to tell us. So the faces rest here, known only by their shape and their silence, watching the sky through centuries they cannot measure. The site of San Lorenzo was occupied for centuries before it was gradually abandoned, its plateau slowly reclaimed by the surrounding jungle. By the time later civilizations rose in Mesoamerica, San Lorenzo had already been quiet and empty for a very long time. What is strange, and quietly puzzling, is that some of the heads appear to have been intentionally buried or mutilated before the site was left. Certain heads were found with deliberate cuts and channels carved into them, not damage from time, but something done with intention and care. Whether this was done as a ritual ending, a way of laying a ruler to rest in stone, or something else entirely, remains quietly open. The jungle around San Lorenzo is full of the kind of quiet that feels very old, birds, insects, the distant sound of water, and very little else. Standing near one of these faces on a warm afternoon, the scale of them tends to settle over you slowly rather than all at once. They are not quite what you expect from a carving, the expressions are calm, the features composed, almost at rest. There is no aggression in them, no theatricality, just a steady, settled presence that has outlasted everything that made them. The Olmec civilization is sometimes called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, older than the Maya, older than the Aztec, the root beneath many roots. And yet so much of what they believed, how they governed, what language they spoke, all of it has softly dissolved into the centuries. What remains are these faces, 10 colossal heads found at San Lorenzo alone, each one a quiet, enormous fact. The stone they were carved from is very hard, very dark, and very heavy, the kind of material that does not wear easily or give itself away. In some ways, basalt was a fitting choice, a material from deep inside the earth, made to last far longer than the hands that shaped it. The heads have survived floods and earthquakes and centuries of root and rain, still here, still recognizable, still somehow composed. And so San Lorenzo sits quietly in the warm Gulf lowlands, its faces turned upward toward a sky that has changed around them without asking. Whatever was meant by them, whatever devotion or memory or power they were made to hold, rests now in the stone itself, unhurried and still. Somewhere beneath the earth, there is only the sound of silence, a deep, absolute quiet that stone has held for thousands of years. Far beneath the plains of Cappadocia, in the soft volcanic stone of central Turkey, lies a city that was never meant to be seen. It descends 80 meters into the earth, through 18 floors of carved rooms, tunnels, wells, and passages wide enough for a person to walk upright. The name Derinkuyu means deep well in Turkish, and the place does have the quality of something that descended slowly, patiently, level by level into the earth. Nobody built this city quickly. The soft volcanic tuff was shaped over generations, hands carving slowly through stone that was once ash from ancient eruptions. The rock is a pale cream color, almost warm to look at, and in the right light it glows softly like compressed sunlight held inside the earth. Above, the Cappadocia plain stretches wide and quiet under a vast open sky, dotted with the strange tall formations the region is known for. Those formations are called fairy chimneys, tall spires of soft stone capped with harder rock, shaped by millions of years of wind and slow erosion. Beneath some of those chimneys, carved directly into their base, are doorways that lead downward into Derinkuyu. The entrance is modest, almost unassuming, a low arch of smoothed stone that could be mistaken for a natural hollow in the rock. Inside, the first room is cool and still, and the air has a quality that is different from the air above, quieter somehow, and older. As one descends the carved stone steps, the temperature holds steady, neither too warm nor too cold, as if the earth itself were breathing gently. Each level reveals new rooms, some wide and low-ceilinged, some narrow and tall, some branching off into corridors that curve gently out of sight. Archaeologists believe as many as 20,000 people may have lived here at one time, sheltering deep in the earth for months or even years. The city has everything a community would need: storage rooms, kitchens, stables for animals, spaces that may have been used for worship. There are ventilation shafts cut vertically through all 18 floors, drawing fresh air down from the surface like the slow breath of the earth. Those shafts also served as wells, reaching water deep beneath the surface, so the people within never had to return above while they sheltered. The rolling stone doors are perhaps the most remarkable detail, great circular discs of stone that could be rolled to seal a tunnel from the inside. Each disc weighs somewhere around half a ton, and they could only be moved from within. An invader in the corridor could not push them open from outside. Nobody knows with certainty who first carved Derinkuyu, or exactly when. The earliest estimates reach back several thousand years. Some researchers suggest the earliest levels may have been dug during the Bronze Age, expanded again and again over the centuries by different peoples. The Hittites may have used it, and later the Phrygians, and later still the early Christians of Cappadocia seeking shelter in uncertain times. On one of the lower levels there is a large vaulted room that archaeologists believe served as a church or a school, with a barrel-arched ceiling carved smoothly from the tuff. The ceiling holds the shape of a gentle arch, and standing beneath it you can sense how much care went into this space, a quietness built into the stone. In 1963, a resident of the town above discovered the city by accident, breaking through a wall in his home and finding behind it a passage that led downward. The city had been known in fragments. Local people had used the upper rooms for centuries to store food, but its true depth was only then beginning to be understood. Since then, only a portion of Derinkuyu has been fully mapped. Further tunnels extend outward and downward beyond the sections open to visitors. There are said to be tunnels connecting Derinkuyu to other underground cities nearby, a network of passages stretching beneath the Cappadocia plain. One of those other cities, Kemakli, lies only 9 kilometers away, and some believe a tunnel once ran between them, though it has not been fully traced. What would it have meant to live here, to wake in the carved stillness, to hear nothing above you but the soft weight of earth and stone? The city holds that question gently, without answering it. The carved walls give nothing away, smooth and patient and very old. Slowly the mind drifts through those corridors, past the great stone doors resting in their grooves, past the wells descending into deeper quiet. The air stays cool and still, and the rock holds the centuries lightly, and somewhere far below the ventilation shafts carry a breath of the world above. And the city simply waits, as it always has, patient and unhurried beneath the plain, holding its silence the way stone holds warmth long after the sun has moved on.